And so I've been studying cryptocurrency now for just about 4 years. Yeah, well, happy to kind of learn more about the development of Cardano and projects as well.
I'm Luigi. I'm a QA engineer at a genetic testing lab called Cambridge Genetics. I got interested in cryptocurrencies when I was in college. There was a classmate who was really into it. I thought about it last December, but I didn't really be much into it until I think the Ethereum classic had a split, and then Charles Hutchinson.
It's your cell phone, right?
Yeah.
That's going to work to call you?
What?
This is going to work to call you using the 3 digits.
Right.
Cool. My name is Mario. I'm kind of new to cryptocurrencies and anything like this. I just learned about it a few months ago, and I kind of got very much into Cardano. And as soon as I seen all this opportunity of being in a place to learn more, I kind of took a chance. That's pretty much all I can say about me.
Cool.
Kind of new to everything.
Yeah. I'm Thor Radford. I'm also a total newbie in the current crypto space. I sort of became aware of it over time, but didn't really avail myself of a lot of deep dives into it until August of last year, where I really kind of just decided to fall down the rabbit hole and see how far I could go. First thing that I noticed was, we've got a problem with how many transactions you can do per second. And I was at the time invested in Bitcoin, and I thought, 7 transactions per second, that's not going to scale very well. And I started looking at what else was out there that was trying to solve that problem. Ethereum came up. That was the one that a lot of people were very excited about, because you do smart contracts and build off of the off-chain stuff, and that seemed really interesting. But when I really started to think about even the limitations of that, along came Cardano. And it was something that, I heard about in a message board somewhere, and was like, yeah, I'll do my own research, thank you very much. Looked at the website, was like, wow, okay, peer reviewed. That's different. I'm a photographer and a video producer. I don't have a lot of technical skill, but one of the things that I do is I work occasionally at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And there's a lot of very smart people who are constantly talking about and doing whiteboards and doing things that I film. And their sort of rigorous evidence-based approaches are kind of how they do their business. And when I saw that and that this was being applied that way, I was like, oh, okay, I want to know more about that. Now, I'm not invested heavily in cryptocurrency at all, but of those that I am, this is the one that I like the most. And been waiting for it to do anything, but at the same time, I don't care, because it just seems to be a good place because of the direction that the development is going. Anyway, that's where I started.
Ted Slatton, I'm from Tacoma. Just for the record, I'm 74 years old, so I'm not a spring chicken like a lot of you guys. The gray beard probably gives it away. But I stumbled into 3 Bitcoins about 4 years ago from my son. And fortunately, I hung on to them and was able to sell a couple of them here when there was a recent rise in the price. So it gave me a little spending money.
Yeah.
I've been following crypto for probably a year, and it was about July, August when I really started to dig in, because you just kept seeing this upward climb and all the buzz. I was aware of Cardano, but it was Charles, November 4th and November 7th, 45-minute video that sold me on this way to the place for money. I liked his approach. And then they stepped on their dick, frankly, and everything blew up. Nothing they could roll out worked in December and January. You go, oh, Jesus, what did I get into here? But here, basically, because I've invested in some companies that are well known, very early. I get in too early. Okay, I've lost a lot of money and I've made some money too. But fortunately the maids have been enough to well cover the loss of them plus. So I jumped into Cardano, got through November, December, and it was already on its tick upward. Kept it. It went back down to 14 here recently, a while back. I went in and bought some more. And it went back up and it almost went back down to 14 again. So I'm invested early. I'm here to find out from you people where the utility is in this and how we're going to get there. The 7 transactions per second and all these things that we talked about, what's coming, what's going to happen with blockchain and cryptocurrency, still leaves me a little bit in a position of not at ease about its adoption universally. I want to see the utility of it, and I want to get a sense from you as to what you see the future being and how we're going to get there.
That's a good point.
Quick question: are any of you Catalan Bobo?
Me.
Okay.
Here.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm Aaron and have mostly ignored crypto. In 2013, I had a coworker fascinated with cryptocurrencies and mining, and I did a little bit of mining. I'm still not fast enough to make it worth it a tiny bit. It's Doge, though. I chose kind of a dog of a coin to mine. Then I went. Is that me? Ooh,
Yeah,
a little too much echo.
Yeah.
Okay. So when Bitcoin peaked at 1,200 and then it fell back to 300 and kept sinking, I just kind of gave up on it and didn't look back. And I did start to notice it when it hit 1,000 again last year. Beginning of last year.
Okay.
But I still wasn't feeling like getting back into it. I didn't hear about Cardano until probably June of last year, and mostly because I was following the Haskell boards or the websites because I'm interested in Haskell as a programming language. And I thought I was going to try to get some maybe before the ICO, and then I just kind of forgot about it. I procrastinated, so I missed that. But I don't know if it was even easy to get in on the early ICO. I think it ICO'd at 2 cents. It ran to over $1, and so I had some speculation interest too. But it's fascinating to me because I think that Haskell can be used to create reliable software. Of course, every programming language has its issues, and I think Haskell has some issues with laziness and creating lots of funks and hard to reason about memory and hard to reason about performance. But you can write very clean software with it. So, on the other hand, the development process might be a little slow. You're noting that maybe their initial release is a little buggy and they've got a lot of work to do. I can imagine how the process of developing in Haskell can be a little slow at times.
Got one more.
So that's all I'm saying.
Introductions?
Yeah, just quick. Intro, background.
Sure. My name is Ben. The background in programming. I make money / lose money on the regular, trading and managing Airbnbs and having a girlfriend. That's nice.
Awesome.
I'm Calvin. I'm from Bellevue. I came across the crypto world last year, so about a year. I knew about Bitcoin. I was kind of, not so sure what it's all about. It seems it's pretty serious. Yeah, and I got into Cardano last year, probably in October, November, something like that. Very interesting project, along with other projects. I think it's very interesting. And I've been following all the happenings in this Cardano world, then you probably want to find out more. What's the direction? What's right? It's really hard to say what's going to happen. What's the time spent? We'll see. So, trying to find out more.
Awesome. Did we get everybody?
Except for me.
And you, yeah.
I'm Sebastian. Interested in blockchain and related things, I guess. I work for Microsoft, which is why we're in this room, because it's just convenient for me. So now, now you know. During my spare time, I make like educational content related to Cardano, so YouTube videos, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I got involved in this space. And then I proposed to be a Seattle Meetup organizer because they were looking for Seattle organizers. And the Cardano Foundation was like, hey, we already have a person, it's us. And so that's how we contacted. And yeah, now we're all here for the great, meetup, I guess.
Absolutely. So Cardano Foundation just sent us some slides. We'll blow through them really fast. I from what I heard of the background, I think it's not going to be a lot of new stuff per se, but they did ask us to present it, so let's do my continued discussions. I definitely want to talk about comment about utility because that's something I'm interested in myself. So, so you want to hit that?
Okay. I'm theoretically sharing my desktop, but do you see it? No.
While we're waiting, one thing that I had noted, and I didn't get a chance to talk about myself. So the reason I got into Cardano was I was very interested in proof of stake as opposed to proof of work, and I felt they had the best. Ouroboros was the best implementation that I'd seen. Actually, the main reason I got into it. Chelan County on the other side of Washington just extended their moratorium on power usage for mining, and I think that's going to be an issue that's going to steadily block and interfere as we move forward. So I think that's one advantage Cardano has up front.
Yeah, that made sort of national news last week with the brownouts that they were experiencing.
Yeah, I mean it's that, and they're worried about fire hazards. A lot of people are running their mining rigs in residential, and they're sucking down so much power. It's producing both the fire hazard concern, a pricing concern because they're running at the retail rates as opposed to business rates and so forth. So I think that's going to be a problem that's going to crop up more and more. As Bitcoin's not slowing down in terms of the difficulty and the mining stuff. So okay, well, let's hit these slides here.
All right. So Cardano Meetup Seattle.
Yes, that's us.
Well.
So this is that's me. Obviously, you guys already met me here. They made these slides. So the one thing I wanted to hit is they did say that both the viewpoints for myself, for Sebastian, are not endorsed by Cardano Foundation. There are our own opinions when we get into the discussion and stuff like that. So that was just one disclosure they want us to make. So brief overview of Cardano. I think a lot of this is already known, but let's just run through it really fast. So Cardano is a decentralized public blockchain, cryptocurrency project, fully open source, smart contract platform, i.e. Generation 3, deliver more advanced features than any protocol previously developed. First blockchain platform to evolve out of scientific philosophy and research-first driven approach. Dev team consists of a global collective of expert engineers and researchers. In fact, I saw they'd hired several people away from Microsoft Research, actually, last few months. So it's kind of interesting. This may be, I get questions from people that are, actually, this isn't the slide, actually. So ADA, of course, is the currency. Cardano is the project.
Daedalus is the wallet.
Daedalus is the wallet, and it's multi-layered, which I think is a big thing from the transaction layer as opposed to the computation layer, as opposed to Ethereum, which is one giant block and has a lot of monolithic issues. Cryptocurrency 3.0, so unique features. Cardano looks to solve scalability, transactions per second, bandwidth, and network, obviously data storage, interoperability, ability for legacy systems, i.e. banks and other cryptocurrencies to communicate with Cardano. That gets into how much metadata you're moving along with your actual disk-based transaction, and they've got a lot of flexibility and built in some things for that. And sustainability, the treasury system, which is sort of a tax that'll be out of the rewards for the staking, and they'll pull that back in, and they've Dash, I think, was kind of the first one that sort of pioneered the whole, community treasury, what should we do with our money, how should we market, what features should we add, and they're looking to build on that, which I think is a very good aspect of it. You're probably familiar with Cardano.org and CardanoFoundation.org for sites, and obviously, are you guys all on the forum, for the Cardano forum? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's
a good source for just generally keeping up with stuff as well, and of course their Facebook page also. The team behind it. So there's three major players, and they each have their own role. Cardano Foundation provided the shirts, and of course is helping us with organizing the meetups. So they are basically tasked with perfect, evolve, and enrich Cardano ecosystem, community management, education, outreach, that type of stuff. Enterprise partnerships and commercial alliances, and shape legislation and commercial standards, and golden source of Cardano protocol information, repository key information, including code, documents, and educational material, including these slides. So the other two, which sometimes creates confusion, so there's input-output. I think input-output Hong Kong, technically, that's the dev and the programming. And of course, they've got a lot of skilled devs working on that. And Emergo, which is based out of Japan, and that is kind of, I would consider like a venture capital thing, and they're looking to fund different projects. I know they've come up with a few things already, and hopefully a lot more to build on the Cardano in terms of its implementation and utility going forward. Cardano community, how you get involved. You can go to a meetup. Look at that. This one. So yeah, there's Twitter, Reddit, and of course, as I mentioned, the Cardano forum. I'm on Cardano forum a lot. I think that's one of the better sources for information in general. Is that it?
No,
it's loading. Okay. I think there's like two more. And the meetups. Actually, they just had a meetup in Iran, of all places, like a week ago or a few days ago. It was very interesting. So they are starting to have them. I've been on a couple calls, and there's a number like in LA and Ireland. I mean, they're doing a good job. It's getting meetups happening all over the world, which I think will be helpful for long-term adoption. Let's see, Cardano newsletter, Cardano.org. Forum, as I mentioned, and social media. On the Twitter, it's Cardano Stiftung, which I believe is the German name for Cardano, and then Cardano Foundation, and the Facebook page, which is a good source. There's still a lot of spammers that make their way in occasionally, but otherwise.
On top of this, they also have a Telegram group, which is of decent quality as far as Telegram groups go. And also, if you were in the mailing list, you may have gotten GDPR'd out of it if you didn't like re-accept the new terms. So yeah, if you want to receive the newsletter, you may have to like re-accept it.
When I got that, it didn't actually work. When I clicked it, it told me like there was a problem with the link. So I was wondering if anybody else had that problem.
It worked for me, but yeah, something to look into. Maybe just re-sign up.
I came at you guys from Reddit.
Yeah, so, the Reddit's also good. Yeah, r/Cardano.
So
yeah.
Okay. So we did our duty. That's slides. So I wasn't really sure. Like, I mean, it wasn't really clear. Like, you know, in terms of the background of people and what, you know, we kind of, Sebastian talked about it earlier. As far as, you know, I didn't want it to be us sitting up here and talking to you as much as an open discussion. I heard at least some of the background and stuff. It sounds like it's a much more advanced group. I wasn't sure if we were gonna have just people to, you know, just had bought a few spare because their son had told them about Cardano or whatever type of thing. But I think it sounds like a more advanced group. I personally get a lot of questions about staking and that type of stuff, so I can provide a quick overview, but I don't want it to be too redundant. And there's some common questions I get. I could give a quick short thing on that. Sebastian is very good with smart contracts and some of the other deeper dev stuff. So we can both talk about those individual topics, or if we just open it now for general discussion. I mean, as you'd mentioned, I mean, long-term utility, where does the blockchain, especially Cardano, if you were to value it as a business, how does it produce value? That's a big question I have for a lot of blockchain projects I've either owned the tokens or coins in and so forth. And there's some that have it and some that don't, and there's still a lot of formative stuff going on, so we can get into some of that too.
That would be a good place to start.
I mean, because I'm not involved in a lot of other cryptocurrencies. Okay. The ones that I have a tendency to be involved in are things like Omise Go, which has payment processing, and they're looking at a lot of partnerships across Asia, which makes it very, like there's going to be a lot of money coming into that.
The question that I have for Cardano is, where does Cardano go? Into what industries or into what places? I've seen that they're going into third world right now, and there's a huge amount of people there. Yep. That all have cell phones.
And most of them don't have bank accounts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cell phone first.
Right.
Next, which is not how we do things around here. Where do you see this going in near term, mid-term?
Sure. So, just my viewpoint, and Sebastian can weigh in with his viewpoints, it may be different. I think Cardano's biggest advantage is the smart contracts that they're building out, which will let a lot of things be automated, a lot of trustless transactions, which then leads into, ultimately, Cardano has a good shot as far as being, I think, a currency in and of itself for payments and transactions, and then levering the smart contracts on top of that. There's a lot of different ICOs that I've seen that don't necessarily have a whole lot of inherent utility. It's more talking and throw out a lot of words like, new tech and this and that, but it's when you boil it down, I do a lot of stock investing, and ultimately most stocks get valued on what is the earnings or future earning potential. Amazon a little bit differently, but otherwise, generally speaking, that's sort of the rule. I think the rollout that they're doing there, obviously Africa, I know there's a couple smaller payment providers that are using Bitcoin right now. Circle, which just came out, which is they're an exchange. I think they're trying to get into payments, and Circle is, from what little I know about it, that may be a good candidate. They're on Ethereum right now, and I think Cardano has a shot of pulling a lot of Ethereum-based projects over to Cardano. They just did the testnet with the virtual machine. And I say that because having looked at trying to do a project on Ethereum, going back to that monolithic model, if you want to just sync up your server right now, it's about a 7-day process just to get hooked up to then build your project on. It's a real pain, basically. So I think they have a lot of opportunity to leverage off of that. Omise Go, as you mentioned, they have a built-in, as far as I remember, they were already a payment processor from their sponsor company, basically, and it was kind of like moving it into crypto to do the payment. So I think they've got a good thing there. But I think the smart contracts will be Cardano's big advantage. And I don't know how much Cardano itself will do it, because Cardano's kind of like trying to be the Windows platform of crypto and then provide you with the tools to build on top. So I don't know that Cardano proper will do it as much as letting people build on the platform and then building out the things. But I do see payment. I just read an article this morning. Digital payments is close to $4 trillion a year right now of digital payments being made. And the interesting comment of the article is saying that banks are doing a terrible job of filling that role. And so a lot of third-party providers are jumping in that are faster, cheaper, what have you. And I think crypto, and especially Cardano, has a good shot, or somebody building on top of Cardano, at getting into that space. And that's a very big issue, not issue, but a very big subject that could be well developed and provide functional utility. Just, as an example, when I do a wire transfer for international payment to one of our vendors, it's like $45, takes like 3 days to get there. And I go into Litecoin and I move 50 grand for 5 cents and it's there in 5 minutes. So, that's the functionality that is a big aspect. And the question is, can you build a business on that provides value for all parties involved? Yeah. So that's my quick thoughts on that.
I think you also mentioned phone use rates, how
mobile.
Mobile. So I think it's Cardano Foundation announced maybe a month ago that they had a partnership with Syrian Labs, which is one of the companies that's trying to do a blockchain-based smartphone. So hopefully, if they do well, I don't think their partner is just Cardano. I think they're obviously their own company doing their own thing. But hopefully, if they do well, we can kind of use that as a means of distribution. And I think Charles also has an interest in this kind of technology because one of the goals of IOHK is to try and expand into Africa, and he would like to be able to have a very good phone experience, because a lot of people there have just phones and not necessarily an internet connection to their phone, and so we need some way for people to do a swaps with their phones without having to necessarily be connected to a network and this kind of stuff. And you can only really do that with, so there's a few ways you can do it, but one of the ways you can do it with trusted hardware that runs on the phone, and so that may be an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think Cardano is definitely taking the lead with the trusted hardware, because they're really keyed up on that as a way to solve a lot of the security issues, and that is something unique that they're definitely focused on.
When you speak of projects, are you talking about applications like business to business or C2B applications in these projects that are being worked on, or are they just development projects around us exchanging with each other?
So, one of the things that's kind of annoying about crypto right now is if you actually, I looked at the whole ecosystem, and if you say who's making money, who's a profitable business, the number one, by far, hands down thing is exchanges. For a while they were raking in, but you're right, that doesn't create any value. That's just, me trading with you, trading, this type of stuff that doesn't really necessarily, it's speculation rather than value creation. So, yeah, I did read another article, and they're saying the average blockchain project lasts 18 months and then craps out, basically. So, there's been a lot of ICOs that, you kind of look at the quote business plan and just how is that really going to work? And I think the other fundamental thing is a lot of times people throw blockchain in, but blockchain is not the solution for everything. It's a slow but secure database at some level, and a trustless database at some level. But beyond that, it doesn't, it's not a miracle worker. It does do a lot of things for the currency and payment and some of the security and stuff, but otherwise it's relatively speaking slow in some respect, and transactions per second or so. It's difficult to beat a centralized database for some of its things. So a lot of the projects, Omise Go is actually an excellent one in my opinion, in terms of there's a business plan that can create value, and it's really about payments, between say Indonesia and Philippines and things like that. So sort of Southeast Asian thing. But I would say off the top of my head, there's not a whole lot that I can think of that I would say, yeah, I think that's, if the stock was, if they were to IPO as a stock, would they have a good reception, basically? So yeah, I think a lot more will come. From some of the work that I did, looking at an exchange and some of the other stuff, there's a lot of feature sets on the platform that aren't ready. Cardano has the roadmap for what you would need, and I think a lot of both the exchanges and also other things will move to Cardano once that happens, but it's not there yet. Even multi-sig wallet was just a recent addition, things like that. So there's still a lot of baseline fundamental development has to happen to make some of these other projects happen. So.
Yeah. And the second question around that is that the third partner is the Japanese.
The Emergo. Emergo.
They're the marketing people for this product. They're the ones that develop the commercial relationships.
Well, Cardano does some. Cardano Foundation, does some of that. Emergo, from my understanding, is they had kind of a third of the initial ICO money, if you will, and their real role is to fund promising projects, really. So you can go there and apply and say, I have this good idea for how blockchain can be used, and they may or may not fund you to help you bring that to reality.
Yeah, and they just announced recently Emergo Blocks, which is like a Hong Kong-based acceleration program. So I think they have an office maybe, or they have some space, because they showed a picture of people in the office with their logo or something. And then they created a Telegram group and a Twitter account last week, I think. So they're trying to get an acceleration program going. They have 2 projects, I think.
Yeah, there's not many right now.
Yeah, that they're working on. But right now we're still in the testnet phase for the KEVM. So there's still a pretty early to try and get people up and going.
Right.
But all these things will come in time. So
Cardano's currently completely centralized, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technically, yes.
Have they tested? Have they testnetted the Ouroboros protocol on internally?
Yeah. So
internally, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's 3 papers right now, right, that have been published. There's the classic Ouroboros, and then there's Prowess and Genesis. So the one that's currently running on the blockchain is just like Ouroboros Classic, if you will, the first version of the paper. The other 2 papers have not been implemented yet. And Ouroboros Classic, the one that's running right now, is running currently in the federated mode. That is to say, there's 3 types. There's like 3 organizations. There's the Cardano Foundation, Emergo, and IOHK, and they each run nodes. And these are the ones that are like generating, or like creating all the transactions. And so the goal is to eventually move away from this federation, or whatever you call it, to a decentralized model. But that requires like research beyond just the protocol level. So that's to say, okay, we have the code for staking done, all this kind of stuff, but now we need to figure out, okay, how do we set it up such that it's a sustainable model that will not be gamed, all this kind of stuff. And that's what they're working on right now. And so they've had registration for a staking pool testnet up, you might have seen, and they got 2,000 applications, I think. I think they've closed the application process now, and that testnet for the staking is planned to go up during Q3, possibly end of Q3. So that's when that's planned to go up right now. At which point they'll have people who are like pool operators, people who will be staking just by themselves, because in Cardano you don't need to run a pool, you can stake by yourself. And then they'll have like a users that will be like, simulate whatever, and they'll try and see if the real life matches kind of the simulations that they've been working on. As far as how much they've tested the protocol internally, I mean, in the original Ouroboros paper, when they tried their experiment, they got like a 3-digit transaction per second going. Obviously, it's hard to simulate a real world in all the scenarios. So if your model says this is what you get, does not necessarily mean this is what you'll get in the real world. But I mean, I think we'll probably expect something in that range. The fact of the matter is that no blockchain currently needs a 3-digit transaction per second. So as long as we're even like the high 2-digit per second, we're good enough for now. And the way the development is laid out is that, I mean, if you check the roadmap, first was Byron, which was like the initial release, where it's like, okay, let's just get a working product out there. Shelly is like the decentralization stage. We're like, okay, we'll have the staking and then we can do all that. And then the next step is Basho, which is like the performance improvements. And so that's when they'll try and move into Ouroboros Prowess, possibly Ouroboros Genesis, all those kinds of like a protocol level improvements to try and get better protocol going that's more performant, more secure, and all these kinds of things.
So when this is going to happen, next year sometime?
Yeah, for Prowess, probably something like around that range, I think. Because
it's about staking itself or decentralization?
Decentralization.
Yeah, that's way behind. Yeah, I mean, initially it was February they're going to do staking pools, and now we're just about in June, and they're just staking applications for staking pools. My guess, and it's total guess, would be September to November when I think it'll actually roll out. Hopefully by end of Thanksgiving it's actually live and running.
Yeah, because they've announced that the staking testnet is planned to go up end of Q3. So if they hit that target, we need to give them some time to run the actual testing, right? So, probably the actual staking will not come before Q4, if not Q1 of next year. I mean, it's hard to know. I don't work for HK, so I don't know how long they think.
The QA for them.
What?
The QA, the testing.
Yeah, it's a public. It's a public testnet. So people who have the technical knowledge to participate in the testnet sign up forums. So, I know how to do blah 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 blah. Okay. And so they have a bunch of applications, and those people will be participating in the testnet for staking. And I'm just not sure how long the testnet will run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, on the testnet, they'll actually have pretend ADA, if you will, and do pretend staking to then sort of give a dry run.
Process like here you guys have Microsoft,
So you mean like how they release?
Yeah.
Right. So
cloud-wise, how do you log that? What's the process? Do you know what's the process in that? Or?
Right. So I mean, there's a few different points. So one is like the release of the settlement layer itself. So Cardano is currently of like two main components. One is the settlement layer, the other one's the wallet, right? Mm-hmm. And so it used to be in the original Byron release that they would just release a new version whenever they have something to release, right? And so now that they have a product shipped, they're trying to move to a monthly release cycle. So they've hired a lot of people, a lot of testers, a lot of like engineers that are like DevOps, this kind of stuff, to try and build up a process for a monthly release cycle. And then for the latest version, which is 1.2, that was mostly when they're trying out their release cycle. So they're trying to see what works, what doesn't, all this kind of stuff. And so hopefully with that, they'll eventually converge to a monthly shipping cycle, if not faster, for the main code base. For the testnets, it's a little different because they exist in kind of like a parallel universe, right? So they'll run the staking testnet along with, the KEVM testnet and eventually the Yellow testnet also. So they'll have at least 3 testnets running. And then whenever those are deemed to be like in a good state, then they'll have to like put that as a patch into the original, like the main net, if that makes sense.
So who's writing the scripts on the testing? Is this a user just comes up with a screen and is assigned to do certain operations?
I mean, this is IOHK employees.
Yeah, that would be
internal. Yeah, it's internal. IOHK does some testing. They have some DevOps and whatever. They also have a company they contract out to. I forget their name. That also is like a testing firm. They have at least one firm that they contract out to for QA.
So I have a question on that. So my question pertains more to the use of Haskell within this process.
Right.
And I think that there's, at least from my understanding, that the application of Haskell isn't necessarily a requirement for people who want to be able to build DApps or do things down the road.
Correct.
And I think that there's a big misunderstanding, at least in my view of this, that people are somewhat thinking that they need to learn that on top of the language that they would use to write an Ethereum smart contract and so on.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, so right now they're actually pushing Solidity as the main language, which is of course Ethereum's scripting or smart contract language, and I believe they're going to roll out probably to Python and a few other type of things. So Haskell is like it's like Windows is written. Well, I don't know what it's written now, but when I was working at Microsoft, it was like C++ and C. You don't have to, but you had Visual Basic, for example, on top for people to actually, quickly make apps. So it's kind of the same thing. Haskell is the underlying thing, and most people are probably not going to do anything with Haskell or need to do anything with Haskell because that's just like the platform itself. Your smart contracts would be Solidity, potentially Python, things like that. So it'll be much easier and faster development cycle, and more importantly, more applicable to a lot more. Haskell is a very small community of programmers relative to C#, Python, that type of stuff. So.
If you're interested into how the smart contract infrastructure is laid out, I uploaded a video to my YouTube channel like a week ago or something. It's like a 15-minute video where I go across the different layers, how they connect to each other, and how they will all play with each other. So you can watch that, I guess, if you want to like have some time to like pause through it and try to understand and look up all the terms. The 1 minute summary is that there's a tool called a K-framework, which is a way for you to encode like a semantics and grammar for a language, and it'll create like a correct by construction compiler and all this kind of stuff. So they kind of like have 2 branches off this. So K is the underlying framework, right? And off of that, they have the K EVM, which is the EVM, but correct by construction because they bound it to K. So it's not the same EVM that Ethereum runs. It's like a remade from scratch in a sense. And that's what will run Solidity. On the other hand, they have Yella, which is similar to LLVM, if you know what that is, which is kind of like a base layer that will provide like a standard security model, standard gas model, this kind of stuff. And that's where they'll have like Plutus Core, along with any other language people want to write. That'll be like the encouraged way to do it, like a tie-in to Yella. If you want to be like a more functional oriented person, they have a core that is called Plutus Core, I think it's being renamed to Plutus Napkin. I'm not too sure which name they'll pick in the end. But it's essentially like the simplest layer you could have that people can build on top of if they want to build like a functional programming language with like dependent types or whatever. So people will not be writing Plutus core. They'll be like binding to Plutus core if you want to make like a more functional system, or if you want to roll out your own language like Python, C++, whatever, you could always bind it to Yella or the K framework directly. And that's kind of, I'm not sure how much of that runtime verification will do. So runtime verification is like the company IHK is working with to do all this. So I'm not sure how many bindings they'll provide. I know they already have like bindings for C. They have like somewhat working bindings for JavaScript and whatever. I'm not sure how much they'll work on tying stuff to Yella. So that's still like a to be seen, exactly which languages they will support and which languages will have to be created by the community. That's kind of like the 1 minute pitch. If you want like nice pictures and whatever examples, I can refer you to my video. So.
Is that the one that was like just recently, last weekish kind of?
Yeah.
The technical update.
No, it's explaining VMs and programming languages of Cardano, something like that's the title. Okay. The thumbnail for the video is like a hierarchy of all the languages.
Yeah, it's got like a flowchart looking at it.
Smart contract is the VM explained.
Yeah.
That seems to me is one of the most attractive features of Cardano. Is that essentially it's going to pull in or be attracted to any project that's going to be moving forward, or if it's existed in the past that wants the technical advantages that it's going to offer.
Yeah, well, like I said, having done some work with the Ethereum, I mean, it was very, very cumbersome. It was not what you would expect. And in fact, similarly, we looked at Neo also, and Neo is like highly centralized in the sense that if you had a smart contract, you had to go to their committee, and I think it was either 3 or 4 person committee, and they had to review it, approve it, and then you had to pay like 15 grand per 1K or something. It was very expensive and very slow. It's like, wow, it's like the opposite of what we wanted to do with decentralized type of thing.
I'm glad you asked about Neo. Is that one of them that could actually potentially come over as well in that same
Neo?
For those three?
I mean, my personal opinion is it's way too expensive.
Okay, so
I think rolling out a smart contract on Neo costs like thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars.
15 grand was what we reported in.
So the attractiveness to come to Cardano for that purpose would be essentially a financial.
Yeah, well, I don't know what Cardano will or will not charge, in terms of how they're, what is the model. I mean, I know from Charles saying that, you want to have the lowest fees, and that because, again, volume of use, in fact, I saw another study and they were saying that, I mean, your valuation of the crypto really boils down ultimately to the number of users. And that's kind of true even in, fiat currency. I mean, US dollar, why is it one of the more valuable ones? Well, it's one of the most liquid ones. And so there is a use case. So obviously if your fees are lower, you bring more people in, I mean, that builds long-term value, basically. And same thing on the dev side. I mean, it's like if you look at apps for your smartphone, I mean, one of the reasons Apple got a big lead is, they were the first to do the apps ecosystem. And of course, the Android, because it was free, you can put it on your phone, they wouldn't charge you, so good penetration. So, yeah, I mean, it's very important for the long term.
I think one of the focuses of IOHK is trying to appeal to people who want a secure platform, right? So I think at this point, people are just losing trust in any Ethereum smart contract. It's like the chance that it gets hacked and all the funds get stolen, it's non-trivial. It's pretty high chance. So, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, we need a smart contract platform that provides a way for you to check the smart contract, have some sort of like verification process that it does what it's intended to do. And I mean, that's kind of like why they're using K and all these formal methods to do this, right? That way, like whenever you see a smart contract, you can see, okay, this is the code, and this is a specification of what the code is supposed to do, and you can run a tool to see that the code matches the specification, all this kind of stuff. And that's really important when you're dealing with a smart contract that's like, millions or, billions of dollars. So you can't just have like, whoops, we integer overflowed and suddenly, everything's worth nothing. And whoops. And that's happened multiple times, and I don't think we can accept that. So that's kind of one of the focuses of the project.
Thinking about security, I understand you guys are trying to do like basically the holy grail of cryptocurrency, right? Which is like fast, decentralized, like low transaction costs, and secure, and private potentially. Like how does I also like one of the things that was like got me right at the very beginning when I first started looking at it was somebody mentioned that it was supposed to be quantum proof, which I was like, okay. And like right now we don't even know what quantum computers could do against a crypto, you know, in cryptanalysis, for instance. But we know that that it's a lot. We know that they could potentially break down, you know, some big hashes pretty quickly. You know, is that something that we have to be looking out for in the future?
Well, IOHK has already sort of jumped on that. I know they hired a very prominent researcher for that quantum aspect. I believe he's out of Scotland off the top of my head. But that was in December, and that was a big hire for them. So they do have, again, I mean, it's one of the nice things. They're sort of producing or pulling together a dream team in terms of, you know, programmers for it.
That's on the roadmap. There's like a quantum resistant signatures as an item on the roadmap, so you can like track their progress as they're working on that. I'm not sure if it'll be a mandatory feature. I think right now, like if they ship a first version, I think it'll be like a different kind of signature that will be, I think, larger in size compared to your regular signatures. Yeah. But I mean, like there are algorithms that are already known that are like a quantum resistance. I'm not sure how much IOHK will be developing their own cryptographic schemes versus trying to implement what already exists.
Yeah, why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah. But so I mean, so IOHK hires a lot of cryptographers to give them the rights to reinvent the wheel. So.
Well, that's actually kind of comforting.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing you'll notice in the blockchain space, a lot of people like implement their own cryptography protocols, and they're not professional cryptographers.
Right.
And it's you know, disaster in the making, and that's why like IOHK not only hires cryptographers, but they go to cryptographic conferences like Crypto and Eurocrypt and these kinds of things to present their protocols to like the cryptographic community. Because if you don't do that, then how do you know like your whatever protocol actually like makes sense, right?
Well, you saw like Verge was apparently hacked like 3 times. I mean, it's 51% attack, but actually a lot of blockchains are susceptible to that. In fact, I saw an article and they were talking. They had a whole list. What was the cost to generate a 51% attack against different things? And some of the smaller blockchains, it was not that cost prohibitive to go in and you can rent from NiceHash and
I think there's also like a Neo where one of their nodes went down and brought down the entire network or something like that. So yeah. So like if you roll out your own you know, consensus protocol or whatever, like you gotta make sure you got, you know, top tier cryptographers working on it and making sure everything, you know, works out. And that's kind of the approach of IOHK, and it means the process takes some time, but you know, it's a trade-off between, you know, hacking it over a weekend and like having something that's like, you know, really well vetted and, you know, has trust of, you know, many experts.
So wallet functionality, I think that I just want to ask that as well. I know we put in our password if you want to create it, you know, make it safer. I think I was talking with somebody on the forum about, so for instance, there's like would be a maximum somebody could take out per day. I don't know if this was a theoretical aspect.
Yeah, no feature of the sort is supported now. There's no reason you can't make a smart contract that does this, right? I think people have tried this in Ethereum. Notably, Parity tried it, and everybody lost their money. So there's a certain risk of like using a smart contract as a bank, because then you gotta trust the smart contract. But you know, some people want to implement their you know, bank smart contract in a sense to have these kind of security measures. So
would there be a way to add some sort of a notification to the wallet when it was a withdrawal, like an email? You know,
right.
Is that even something that could make sense? But has it been explored, thought about?
Yeah, so that would maybe something you can attach onto a blockchain explorer, right? So there's the official like a Cardano blockchain explorer, which is like a not really touched much. The code doesn't change. It was kind of like the simplest thing they could possibly make. There's a community built one, or I should say community built. It's not open source, but it's built by a member of the community called Ada Tracker. And that one lets you put an address and add an email notification to it. So you can get notifications that way. There's nothing built into the protocol that will let you get a notification as far as I know, other than like occasionally checking your wallet.
I haven't seen that in other wallets, but it's just something that seemed like it'd be a helpful security feature in some of it.
Like the new paper wallet.
Yeah.
That was, and it's dead sexy looking too.
Yeah,
I like the big minotaur. I'm not a big fan of that. But 27 word passphrase.
It's 24.
27 it comes with 16 built in, and then you put 9 in, so or whatever. I don't remember. But yeah, I just sort of opened it up today for the first time. And sort of I got it loaded and synced the blockchain, and I was like, hey, okay, everything's coming up, works right, and then I'm like, hey, what's that little envelope over there? And that was where I saw it, and I was like, oh, see, it has kind of a neat security protocol built into it where it prints part of the thing, and then it gives you the other part in a different method. And I didn't go to that because I don't have a printer, but I figured, with something that's broken in half like that, I can do it even insecurely, which makes it really cool. So something to sort of send upstream if you get a chance to make a comment. That's a really nice feature.
Yeah,
Other paper wallets that I've seen, I haven't interacted with them very much because I've got Trezor, so I don't like to do anything on that if I don't have to. Make me nervous because you have the whole thing in the clear at a couple of different points, right? Where it can be either viewed or scanned or screen grabbed or whatever, and somebody's got your whole enchilada. Whereas this thing seems to be broken into pieces so that you can't get everything all at once.
Yeah, I mean, ISK's released recently quite a fair amount of stuff. I think they had the paper wallet, the same updates to the paper wallet. Most users may not have realized, but they actually shipped a new version of the API. So they shipped API v1, which is significantly better. And the way they build API v1 is actually like the old wallet code. It's mostly like gone. So they because the way they built it, was okay. During the Byron release, we just need something, right? So they make sure everything works correctly, but it's like this is their first time making like such a big project. And then once they got something that works, and then they spent time making like a wallet specification. So you might have seen that. I'm not sure how many of you checked it out, but they had like I forget the link. It's like 30-page document or something about what does it mean to have a cryptocurrency wallet, what operations does it need support, what runtimes, what considerations you need. So they spend the time like writing this like huge document, and then they say, okay, now that we have the domain knowledge and the paper, let's like try and make like the V2, if you will, or in this case the V1. And so like if you go to their code base, they have like a folder called like Wallet New, which is like their new implementation of a wallet, which contains the new API and will contain a bunch of other like security features in the future, and like it'll be much more performant. So I mean, people don't really realize, because like when you install the node, you install the wallet UI is like mostly the same. It doesn't really look like anything's changed, other than if you try and like a wallet restore, you might notice like now it's like a faster, prettier interface. But they've got a team of people working hard on that. And they're still making progress on hardware wallets. Every week they have like some small parts they're moving around to like eventually get to that goal.
Keep going, going. I wanted to work with my Trojan.
But cause to set up hardware wallets, they need to set up in such a way that also works with like light clients and all this kind of stuff. Right. And requires a lot of consideration, especially if, how it ties into like staking. So
that was giving me another question that follows on that is light wallets and being able to operate off of a cell phone. Obviously, going into small third world countries, I've been in the Dominican Republic in the last year or two, and I can tell you nobody has a computer, nobody has electricity for very long, but they've all got a cell phone, and they've all got a smartphone that can do either Android or, in the cases of the super rich Dominicans, iOS. Any idea? Like, I know that they only kind of threw out a couple of things recently, but they're working in that direction. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, so they're mostly focusing on trying to build an API to communicate with like an external device.
Okay.
Right, so they have in their code base they have a concept of like an external wallet, and that's what they're trying to bind to. And that external wallet could be, hardware wallet, could be a light client, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm not sure if iOSK itself will build up the phone application. They're definitely not going to build their own hardware wallet. They're working with some partners for that. But we'll see what happens. I know one of their teams started working on like a command line interface for a wallet, so you don't have to use Daedalus at all. I think it's like just command line only. And I know IOHK has also been spending a lot of time looking into compiling Haskell and or Rust to WebAssembly, and or compiling Haskell and Rust together. These kind of like a compilation targets. So they have like a few different projects going on, and so we'll see what comes of that. But one of their partners, like which is, I forget the name, is like Twig.io, something like that, which is like a Haskell firm. I recently wrote an article that was like some tool they wrote to compile Haskell to WebAssembly in like a one step, and it's like a project they're working on. And judging by the fact, since they work with IOHK, and the name for their tool that does this compilation is like a Greek name, I'm like, looking at something like, I bet you this is like something to do with IOHK, because IOHK names everything with Greek names, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, but yeah, they're doing a lot of research behind the scenes. And I say behind the scenes, it's open source. If you know where to find it, you can find the code and whatever. But like, it's different from like a Charles tweeting about it, saying, "Hey guys, come check this out." So.
Cool. I was disappointed to find that it creates maybe 1 million files on disk when you install.
Yeah, I mean, so that's part of like when they made the first wallet, it was like, let's get something to work. Because if you think about it, you got to like, if you want to create a blockchain, you have to store it on disk somehow. And so like, okay, maybe we like to batch it into groups of like 10 blocks of the file, or like some sort of like tree or whatever. What's the most efficient way to do it? And the most efficient time-wise way to do it is just create a bunch of files. And so that's what they did for the first release. And now they're paying for it in very slow sync times, time to download the blockchain, all this kind of stuff. IOHK has tried to tackle this problem on multiple occasions. I'm not sure if this is like an overarching design to tackle this problem, or if there's like a few devs here and there, like occasionally let me just think about it for a while. I know at some point they put out a spec on their GitHub page that was like, what properties do we need to have to tackle these small number of files? If we're to solve this problem, what kind of properties do we need to have? And so I think it's like 2 devs or something like that worked on that. And they recently made a change that tried to like remove some of these files. And so I'm not sure if this is like a coordinated effort where they have like some project manager driving this, or if this is like the occasional cleanup. But I know this is probably becoming a higher priority because they've had issues on like Unix-based operating systems, where it's like just had trouble handling the amount of inodes that exist. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously it caused a bunch of like slowdowns in block downloading time. So it'll be solved eventually. I'm not sure when it'll be solved, but
yeah, it'll create issues on Windows as well. NTFS is very heavy.
Yeah,
overhead for
it's really slow, but yeah, it's something to work on. But I mean, related to that, one of the ways they're trying to scale up the chains is just side chains, which is why like the settlement layer is a different chain than the computation layer. So like if you want to use smart contracts or whatever, you'll most likely have to switch from the settlement layer to the computation layer. So you'll go to a different side chain. To do that, the settlement layer will run very basic smart contracts. They have a version of Plutus Core that runs on the UTXO model. I'm not sure how much work they've done to implement it, but that's the idea, right? So on the settlement layer, you'll have like a very limited smart contract platform where everything has to be like really well vetted. And so the idea is that if you're on the settlement layer, you know your assets are safe. Nothing's gonna like, no smart contracts are gonna blow up. And if you move to the computation layer and start using smart contracts, you're like basically acknowledging the risk that you're trusting software written by other people as you're using these contracts. But with that, you know, anybody will be able to create side chains, you know, for their own purposes. And so, I mean, that's kind of one of the ways blockchains is trying to scale. So sharding is something that they've wanted to do also. I don't know if they've started any research track on the subject, but I know it's something that they'll want to look into eventually. They've said that before.
That's
Hydra, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly it, yeah.
Yeah, because that's after Genesis, I think, in like steps, but I'm not sure if they've started working on Hydra yet.
But Hydra will then, when somebody's talking about transactions per second, that removes one of the biggest limitations of blockchain, which is trying to funnel it into one single block. You'll actually have multiple things happening at the same time, and that will be, I think I heard quoted like 10,000 transactions per second is what they're thinking for Hydra.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you count transactions per second. Because, I mean, if you got multiple independent chains all computing, do you sum of the transactions, or is it like the max of a single chain? I don't know.
But and for one thing I'll throw out is like, so Hydra will actually be a DAG, and I just mentioned that because like there's a lot of hype, if you will, about DAGs in the space, so it will eventually, Hydra itself will be a DAG. So
Wasn't IOTA one of those?
yeah, IOTA's one. I mean, it's a Tangle, which is really a DAG, and there's a couple others. Directed acyclic graph is what it means, so it's fairly straightforward data structure. But I just say that because a lot of different projects that have come along, like, oh, we're a DAG. Well, that's okay, that's great, and there's some efficiencies that can be gained, but it's not the be all end all, so to speak. It's just one aspect of the blockchain or cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so I mean, the work on Ouroboros is not done yet, so they'll keep improving the core protocol, or at least as far as papers are concerned.
And actually, one thing I'll throw out as my public service is when they do get to staking, you do not transfer your funds to the pool. You'll generate a private key in your wallet that is effectively a staking key, if you want to call it that. That's what you'll allocate. That will keep the funds locked in your wallet, but you're not actually giving the funds to the staking pool. I just say that because I still have concerns that somebody's going to throw out, I'm a staking pool, give me your ADA, and off they go. That's not the way it's going to work. So.
People have other questions about why, like a staking pool, one might choose one over the other. I know there's some differences in fees potentially, things like that.
I mean, I think everybody's kind of in the dark. I mean, we're in the dark on, what are the rewards going to be exactly. I will say what is known is that when you do your staking, you'll effectively get paid directly from IOHK or from Cardano, however you want to look at it. Like, it'll just show up in your wallet. The pool itself will not have to, get your reward and then pass it back to you, which, in my opinion, is a huge win. Because you get into, for example, in Ethereum, there's a lot of mining pools. They say, oh, we're zero fee. And yet when you got involved in those pools, magically you just somehow never earned as much as you did when you were paying the 1% fee. Well, because in theory they were taking some of those rewards and not passing them back. So they've bypassed that, which is great because it'd be redundant for every pool to code up their own accounting software, if you want to call it that. So so that will be passed directly, and my understanding is the pool operators will then get paid directly as well. So yeah, how will you pick one over the other? They have a ranking system. They talk about like a network quality, and so you can see, are you running on high-end computers? Are you running on your laptop in your spare bedroom? and that would reflect in that. So of course you don't want to be in a pool that's going to miss rewards because they're not running better equipment.
And they announced they'll have multiple papers on the topic, not just one. So I think in the latest Technical report, I think they mentioned that a paper on delegation is coming up soon, like within a month.
Okay.
And then I'm not sure when their paper on staking will come out. But I think in the video we saw from like the meetup in, where was it, London or something like that, I think Lars mentioned that there will not be just one paper, there'll be many papers on the topic. So Charles has linked at various points in time graphs of like their simulations or whatever. The key thing is that you see a simulation going on, but you have no idea what the axis means or whatever. So it's like really a tease. But
and there is, I mean, a built-in thing that the pool will only be allowed to be so big, and at which point the rewards will stop, and that's to avoid what you see like in Bitcoin mining, where just, you know, you have like 3 pools, and if you put them together, 3 mining operations, then they can easily become more than 51%, basically. So yeah, hopefully a lot more details over the next couple of months on that.
Any other questions? Are any of you developers? No? Yes? Have you checked out the KEVM testnet?
No.
Yeah. So they launched that like last week. So I'm going to try and do something with it on the weekend. But it's going to be interesting to see what you can do with it, because with the K framework, the way it works is that whenever you compile something to it, you can provide a verification file, right? So you say, here's my program, and it'll do some sort of like static analysis or whatever on that. But you can also provide kind of like a verification program that asserts various properties of your code, and it'll check that all the properties hold. And I spent some time trying to study like the K framework in itself, and they actually have a good talk on the subject at an Ethereum conference, where they're talking about how they tried to write the KEVM in the first place. If you're interested in the topic, you can go check it out. But trying to figure out how to build all the rules and semantics yourself seemed pretty complicated, and I feel like it's the kind of thing where unless you like really code it up yourself, it's really hard to understand. So I'm looking forward to like people getting to this test net, figuring out how to hook everything together, and then hopefully like making tutorials on the topic. But so if you want to be like a pioneer, or you know, be the first one to write a blog post about how to set it all up, like now's the chance, I guess.
I'm just curious what other like currencies you guys are involved in or have been involved in the past.
Well, I've had Stellar, so I'm somewhat familiar with the staking pools where they actually send something to your wallet, like my ledger, and you get a little things from the pool. So I can actually appreciate the fact that it would come directly instead of versus through.
Yeah, I think that avoids a lot of risk.
Yeah, it's a little creepy to see somebody's also words in your own wallet. So and so yeah, I think that's that.
I worked with some friends on a cryptocurrency that was called Chartercoin, but that didn't get too far. It's supposed to be quantum resistant. Other than that, I'm a big fan of Enigma.
What's the name?
Enigma.
Okay, I've heard of it. Yeah, I don't know much about it.
But yeah, other than that, I'm pretty much just a fan and a trader. I haven't really dived into like coding up things on top of these platforms or anything. Right now?
Yeah.
I actually think that
It's dry.
oh yeah, super dry. I think that demand is pretty much just low right now is what I think. Like we're seeing a lot of like there's been supposedly good news, like adoption and things like that. Like you've got like the big players in like traditional financial spaces are like making inroads here and there, but that's not really moving prices at all. So I think right now we're kind of on a sliding, like demand is just slowly kind of trickling out. But that could easily change.
One thing you might have noticed is that
I think like in general,
like if you look really long term, there's like kind of a big wave that you want to ride. Or at least that's kind of the investment theory. Yeah, just exactly.
One thing you might notice is that Charles is like not really trying to pump the price as much as like other like CEOs or whatever you will of like various other projects. And I mean, part of that is I think Cardano is like above that. It's we're trying to build something well made and rigorous and all this kind of stuff, and we're not down into like just trying to make some quick money. But the other thing to keep in mind is that IOHK is just like a generic like R&D firm, right? So they work with Cardano, but they also work with Ethereum Classic. They've done some stuff with like Dash, where they looked at their treasury model, and they've like publicly stated they're open with cooperations with other coins. I think they also have something with like a Zencash, which was for their like a version of Enigma. They're trying to do like the shielded transactions, private transactions, all this kind of stuff. So Charles and IOHK is trying to manage like all these various projects and cooperations, and it turns out that Cardano is like their biggest project. But
in like a few words, what sort of company would you say IOHK is? Is it a research company?
Yeah, I mean it's a R&D firm that does contract work for blockchain platforms.
And
I mean,
are they huge? How big is
the company? It must be like double digit, nearing triple digit employees.
Yeah, I think it's near.
Yeah, because they hire a lot. I mean, if you go on their career page, they have like 15, 20 postings already. If you go on their teams page, like iohk.io/teams, they've got a pretty large number. The Cardano and Daedalus teams plus like senior researchers, I think those are like the core like people working on like ADA. But they obviously have like an Ethereum Classic team. They have like just like generic legal teams, all this kind of stuff. But I know I think Charles mentioned that the goal of IOHK is to eventually become a fully blockchain funded company, right? So they would like to in the future be able to do contracts not necessarily with entities but with blockchains, and that's kind of one of the reasons they're trying to build up the treasury system in Cardano. So as to say, like I forget if the treasury comes in Voltaire or if it's sooner, but eventually like a Cardano platform will have a treasury system funded mostly by the staking pools, I think, and I'm not sure if they'll have a tax on regular transactions also. I think they've only announced that it'll be from like excess stake. I'm not sure exactly how it'll work. But so you can imagine in the future if ADA becomes like a widely used currency, there's going to be a treasury that gets filled up, and then IOHK will be able to propose like, hey, we will build up like whatever feature in exchange for this amount of ADA, and then that's how they'll operate their business with ADA or possibly like Ethereum Classic or any other coin that may eventually like build this treasury system. So I think that's the goal of the company itself, and I think the date is like 2020 or something like that they're trying to get this by. I'm not sure if you.
Oh yeah.
Because like IOHK, I think their contract for Cardano ends in 2020, and then at that point, Charles hopes that the the project will be decentralized enough that he will be able to like repropose IOHK, but like as a community supported project, like possibly community funded through like the treasury system and all that kind of stuff.
So what is Charles's relationship with IOHK?
He's CEO of IOHK.
He founded it, I believe.
Yeah. So like Cardano was originally started by Emergo, which is the VC firm, and then they're the ones that reached out to IOHK, I believe, to like have them contribute to the project.
So I got a question. I noticed that Charles is pretty frustrated sometimes. There is a lack of coverage in the news.
Right.
Of Cardano. Do you know why it's that? Because it's a great project.
Yeah, I think.
So I've seen that on Twitter.
Right.
I follow him on Twitter, and
I think part of it is historical reasons. I think Cardano, when it came out, did not have that good of a name until IOHK joined. And like they changed the entire project basically after IOHK joined the team. So if you don't know, historically, Cardano was created by Emergo originally as like a coin for like a gambling and this kind of stuff. And that's what the ICO was originally for. And that's why, like, if you ever see, it's not, people usually in the English media don't know about this because it was originally launched in like Japan. But even now, if you look at like Japanese news articles and whatever that people write about Cardano,
The ICO was done in Japan.
yeah, mostly in Japan. If you look at even Japanese publications now, people still like think it's like, oh, Cardano, the casino coin, is going up in price. It's like, no, it hasn't been like anything related for a long time. So I think like that's like whenever you mention like this kind of like casino whatever, people like get kind of suspicious. So I think there's that, and like when Charles joined the team or like joined the project, it's supposed to be okay. Let's not do this. Let's instead build up this like science-driven like cryptocurrency, and that's kind of like what it's evolved into. So it's like very disconnected from its original roots. So I think there's that aspect, and I think there's also a lot of people like that are out to get Charles, so to speak, that have like previous outings, and so there's that. And then I also think that the third thing is that the project is really complicated. Like there's some projects where it's like just the white paper, you read like 2 or 3 pages and you mostly get like some general idea, and okay, you can write a article on that. I mean, Cardano is not easy to write an article on. You got to read like multiple. I mean, IOHK has written maybe 20, 30 papers so far, and obviously they have like a huge code base, multiple like technical documentations, and it's really not easy to parse through unless you're like a really specialized on topic. And journalists on like topics of cryptocurrencies are usually paid very, very little. Usually like a few cents, dollars per article, this kind of stuff. So that's why like in a lot of publications for cryptocurrencies, they just like find pre-existing info and like copy paste it and just like get stuff out the door as much as possible. Which is also why like usually if some like fake news comes out, it just spreads everywhere really fast. Because the people who are writing these articles don't get paid enough to like read a paper or whatever. They're just like, okay, I need to make my money, like I'll just copy paste this stuff around. So I think there's that aspect also.
There's been 2 ICOs that have been out supposedly for Cardano, Traxia and Spade. Are you familiar with their?
Yeah, so Spade is not an official, right? It's not an Emergo project, but I think it also started from Japan, and I think it is partially because of the casino whatever roots. Yeah. But when they announced their ICO or whatever, Charles had never heard of it, and they finished their ICO, and I'm not sure if they ever announced anything since then. So I'm not sure like when anything will happen. It's possible that they'll release something on the platform, but just nobody knows, right? Traxia, however, is actually like backed by Emergo. They have much more credibility, if you will. So you can go check out who they are and their history and all this kind of stuff. But obviously, Emergo Blocks right now is looking for projects for their accelerated program. So if you happen to know people in Hong Kong, I guess, you can refer them over. They haven't announced anything so far. I remember in the Telegram group, somebody asked them, like, do you have any other projects you're working on? And I think the answer is, like, we can't reveal anything yet. So, take that as you will.
I guess to follow with that, with Traxia and the settlement layer, or how does that come into play? Because it seemed like an awful lot of money they were talking about, trillions of dollars, and
right.
And it seemed to be exciting when it comes to involving Cardano or any
right.
currency, right?
Right. I mean, well, if they want to get this out the door as fast as possible, probably it'll be written in Solidity. Probably they're currently trying to get it running on the KVM, and then once that gets added, that's probably what they'll ship on. I don't know. I'm not part of their team, so I don't know. But that seems to be, if they want to get something out the door as fast as possible, this makes the most sense.
I think that's the plan. They're going to launch first on that, and then that's the first one to come over.
Yeah.
When we talk about interoperability with potentially other blockchains and others, existing blockchains, I'm assuming. Is that sort of also part of the goal of Cardano in the future? I haven't been able to follow all of the developments, but I know that one of the things that Omisego is doing is that they are kind of trying to be the exchange, if you will, of value between various different asset classes. So a class that's like Starbucks gift cards and U.S. dollars or something like that, and they would take the asset, put it into their blockchain somehow, using the hocus pocus that they're building, and then be able to spit out value to some third party or fourth party or fifth party company. And I haven't heard of anything like that being really thought of inside of Cardano's space, but I have heard about interoperability between existing blockchains.
Oh, okay. Where you kind of...
So I'm kind of trying to figure out, is that something that, to what degree is Cardano also going to operate kind of as an exchange?
Right. I think the difference is that it's a split between two teams, right? So the compatibility with the blockchains, that's what IOHK is working on. Mm-hmm. So they have their non-interactive proof of works or whatever it was the exact long term. And then they also have the non-interactive proof of stake paper that they've also mentioned that they're working on. The first one is non-interactive proofs of work, something like that, right? Yeah. So that's kind of interoperability with other blockchains that they're working on. For the financial side of things, with the legacy system, that's more like Cardano Foundation that's working on that. So the debit card, the Cardano, the ADA debit card, whatever, that's a Cardano Foundation project. The Cardano Foundation also has a forum somewhere in England. Do you know the name?
I don't know that.
Yeah, they recently, I think it's a month ago, 2 months ago, where they now have a kind of think tank going on to try and figure out applications of ADA, and I haven't looked into it that much. And I don't think they've done much PR on this so far. But if you look it up / probably ask in the forums about it, I'm sure somebody will be able to dig up the link for you. And I know they have a few different discussions that you can find on their website. So if you're interested, you can possibly check that out.
But I think that they're definitely going a little bit beyond what Omisego is doing in terms of they're really definitely seem to be targeting in the future for your standard banks.
Right.
Which is really the ultimate tie. If you're going to go to Africa and then still be able to move it over if you move to the U.S. or whatever it is, and that gets into metadata, knowing your customer, all that type of stuff. And I vaguely recall a video, I think in December, where Charles talked about that. So.
Speaking of banks, has anybody done any research on the Bitcoin cash ATMs? Has anybody watched the people use it?
No.
Yeah, I remember.
Makes good price.
They don't, right?
Yeah.
Or they're just there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean in terms of usage? I don't know.
Yeah, I remember.
Down in Westlake Center.
Yeah, I watched 2 hours. Nobody used it on Saturday.
Yeah, I remember back.
I'm curious if anybody else has gone out and seen it.
I haven't even seen one in real life. I mean, I've seen photos of it.
I have a picture of one. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen pictures, but
you can
I
see
could show
one
the
down in
ADA
the
one
basement of Westlake Center.
Oh, really?
Down at the northwest.
Yeah, it's on the Fifth Avenue
at the
side.
north entrance.
But I mean, there's definitely a huge chicken and the egg problem, which is, okay, I want to use my ADA or any crypto to go buy something, and it's, if you go, Bitcoin Cash, they're trying to get new merchants involved, but it's a very small thing. So therefore, okay, I moved my money to this currency, now what do I do with it? Where can I spend it, type of thing.
The only thing I can see is somebody in India sends the money over here, or vice versa.
Well, but that's the standard remittance model. Omise goes, doing that, and that's definitely, Stellar is also into the payments, and of course Ripple, obviously. But beyond that, the reason I got into crypto was really because I run a company, we take Visa, MasterCard, and there's a huge chokehold. They'll sock you. If you get $100, you don't get $100. You get $97 or maybe $96.50, or it just depends on how hard you can negotiate with the processor, basically. Right. With crypto, that to me is a killer application. If you can functionalize it and say we'll take 1%, you know, you can immediately do that. The negative is, okay, that's great. I get my currency in, be it ADA or whatever. Now I need to pay my payroll, and they don't want crypto, they want dollars. So how can I do that without then running another 1.5% or whatever to flip back and forth? And of course, volatility risk along the way.
Yeah, I remember, so I come from Victoria in Canada, and somebody set up a Bitcoin ATM in like 2013, 2014, somewhere that time. And after a few months, they just took it down, and they're like, this is way too much legal trouble, like I don't even want to deal with this. So I think that's another aspect of it, because like if you open a Bitcoin ATM like here, are you technically an exchange? Like, how does all that work legally? I think a lot of the legal questions have been like resolved in the past few years. Obviously not all of them, there's still huge legal problems, but there's at least like some case studies, I guess, like some sort of like reference, like, okay, well this happened before and this is what they did, and they got a pass, so as long as we follow the same model, we should get a pass too. But
I've used some Bitcoin to pay a vendor in China, which saved a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
On your transfers, you're $50 going this way.
Yeah, plus they take $12 on the other end or whatever. Yeah.
Cross-border exchange fees and cross-border currency exchange rate fees and all kinds of things. It's really expensive. And it's really quick. The guys like it over there.
Yeah, I mean, I know that. I mean, it has a ton of potential. It's just there's a chicken and the egg with the vendors in terms of like, okay, where do I spend it, you know, and secondarily, you know, how do you have that liquidity back and forth between U.S. dollar or yuan or whatever it is to go from fiat to crypto and back in again.
It took a while to build a relationship where they were comfortable to accept it in China. But once it worked and that savings were evident, then I guess it's okay.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that was actually the whole reason I got into it 2 years ago, but it hasn't. There's I don't know, like I said, chicken and the egg issue basically, and how do you get around that?
Or be able to pay your bill with Cardano or ADA links on websites.
Yeah,
yeah. Really neat. Yeah, and I mean before that, it has to become decentralized, right? You know, so there is your chicken and the egg. Yeah. I think, you know, my experience with Bitcoin was that I bought a few Bitcoin, you know, very early on in my experience of cryptocurrency, which was only last year, and rather immediately was kind of stunned by how much it was going to cost me to move it, because at that point, you know, everybody was transacting, and it just bottlenecked so badly that you know, we had people that were paying $150 worth of fees to move $25 worth of Bitcoin. And it became sort of like upside down completely for a lot of folks. And then you could go into smaller coins that just didn't have any volume and move things like for fractions of a cent, you know, in fractions of a second. And but that's also, you know, just because of scaling.
Well, that's the whole scalability issue, which, I mean, that was one of the things I was impressed with Cardano. I mean, they were taking that to heart as a key issue.
Well, they came around right in the middle of that big fiasco.
With Bitcoin.
With Bitcoin like blowing up and getting, you know, stock. And, you know, people were waiting 5 days for the coin to arrive and, you know, all that kind of thing. It's just like, you know, because the backlog was so enormous.
Right.
I remember looking at 144,000 transactions backlogged, you know, several
8-hour
days
wait
in a row, you know, it would last forever.
Right.
And clearing out cash was ridiculous.
Right.
Where you could just go to a different coin. Everything was working smoothly and perfectly, and, you know, Dash was like.
Yeah, I mean, it works great there. The flip side is, you know, on the other end, if you want to then convert back to US dollars, you know, how can you do it, and how much are you going to pay to do it, basically? So that's sort of the issue.
And the vision that I sort of see in the future, and this is like some amorphous future down the road, is that, you know, all of the fiat just becomes kind of background stuff. The stuff that you carry with you in your pocket.
The physical.
The physical world of everything is eventually going to go here. I'm almost certain of it, as long as we can solve the sort of how many layers we need to have.
No, I agree. I mean, you know, I personally don't carry much cash. I mean, it's carry your Visa card, and it kind of does the job. But like I said, for the merchant standpoint, you know, your 3.5%, of course, is a lot of fees that are running around that could be obviated because they're running on a relatively inefficient network.
There also needs to be a lot of education on the topic. I mean, people lose their keys all the time.
Yeah, that's a huge issue.
And at some point, we either need to have a mass education of everybody on like good practices, or there will be some crypto banks or whatever where like they'll be in charge of your private key, and in exchange you'll pay them some amount of money. In the same sense, like banks exist right now, right? Instead of having your entire savings on your mattress, that's not safe. You put it, hand it to the bank. It's possible we'll have the exact same model, and it will be in your advantage, because one, you'll be more safe for the bank, because if you lose your private key, your bank has a copy or whatever. And also, it'll be the same thing as here, where like you give money to the bank, and your bank will invest the money and then give you some sort of like dividends or whatever. So some people think like, oh yeah, the bank systems will go away. I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I think this model of the safety and the investing your money for you, that's like pretty attractive for most people, right?
But I think, like, in my opinion, like if you get to biometrics and your iris is the key, you don't, well, I guess unless you go blind or something, you basically don't lose the key, and therefore you don't need that third party aspect to it. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge, I mean, you read the story about the guy who had his, whatever, 50 million on his hard drive and tossed it out and couldn't access it, and therefore he has the money, but he doesn't, in fact, have the money, type of thing. So
and that basically evaporates.
Right, and that's something that has to be addressed, because obviously you don't expect to put your money in Bank of America and then show up and they go, oh, what's your secret code? Oh, you don't know, you don't have the money. Yeah. So, which again is where you have an ID. So, when you were watching that ATM, did it actually list like how many? Were there vendors that would take?
Limited is what you can see, and the face of it isn't. It doesn't give you a lot of options.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering.
There's one in Redmond. I think at the town center.
Redmond Town Center?
Yeah, I believe it's in Redmond Town Center.
I didn't see.
If you go to Bitcoin, you can see a map, and it shows you where they
are. Oh, really? Okay. I mean, I go to Redmond Town
Center. And they're multi-coin.
Okay.
I mean, the one in Westlake, I think, sells Ethereum, Bitcoin, BTC, and BCA.
But if you go to the ATM and I, like, for example, I have some Ethereum, or I can then say I want to request dollars and it'll spit out bills, or?
Yeah, I think it'll go both directions.
Okay, that's
so
what, yeah.
So you can say, I've got $20 or $100
right.
or whatever it is, and you feed it money, and then it gives you an amount.
Okay, so it's a
and
true.
Send that to whichever wallet you want. You get
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, going back to the private key thing, I was actually at a different blockchain meetup, and the guy did a demo, and then in the demo he forgot his private key and actually kind of shut down the whole demo. I mean, so that was like a totally I mean, he's obviously nervous because he's speaking, but he forgot his own. He'd made a new wallet to do the demo, and then when he got up there, he forgot, and he was like trying to get it. He's like, I can't remember. I mean, it was like $2 or whatever he's trying to move around, but it does show you that is a massive weak link. And I mean, I've seen on the forums where people are like, I'll pay $50 or X amount because if you'll help me unlock my ADA because I forgot my kit passphrase and that type of thing. So again, I sort of feel like ultimately, if you can get into biometrics in some capacity and tie that in with the maybe that's the safest way to do it, and that solves that problem.
Yeah, we are going to have some interesting things that are going to happen when you die as well. You're going to have
how does that move?
What happens with
right.
the ADA that's locked up, and you're the one who knows the key. Yeah. I mean, it's not for nothing.
But yeah, I mean, but those are definitely some of the. I mean, it's frustrating because there's so much promise, and yet there's key choke points that definitely stymie a lot of aspects of it.
Should be a contract for that.
Right. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there should. And that's something that I saw somebody who had created what I think it was called Lastware.io, which was that turned out to be a shitcoin, but it was something that basically the idea of it was when you pass away you want your keys to be given to somebody else,
right?
Such that they will actually work.
But that's kind of the concept of multi-sig wallets, right? You can have a wallet such that if any 2 or 3 people approve, then you're good to go. So you can maybe have like a multi-sig where if it's a certain key, you only need one and it always goes through. But then maybe there's another option where if like 3 or 4, which are like 3 family members or something approved, and it can go through. I don't know.
Yeah.
That may be another way to solve the problem. So, yeah. Cardano does not support multi-sig wallets yet, but they're working on it. They made a pull request like last week or something to work on multi-sig support. So hopefully it'll come next version. I'm not sure. These things take time, so I'm not sure if like you never know what's gonna happen with software engineering. So I make no promises. I don't work for ISK, but you know.
Well, I just want to get a wallet.
Yeah.
That can travel with me, so I can have it with it, on the phone.
Right.
I've got 6 or 8 wallets.
I did see, I think it was Australian airport, and basically every vendor at the airport, as I recall anyway, had signed up such that you could use, I think it was Ethereum and a couple other things. And the idea was for a traveler that you're not going to have to carry around, cash and then flip the cash in a local currency, but as you're traveling through the airport or whatever, you could just use, a crypto coin, which I thought was a good concept. So.
What's the settlement time on a Bitcoin? I think
What's that?
Like for instance, I think the limitations on the Bitcoin just seems to be like some of the conversations don't seem to me in line with some of the limitations of Bitcoin. Like for instance, paying for a cab.
Right.
I mean, you'd have to sit in the cab for 5 minutes
for the confirmation.
For the confirmation, and they'd want to go. It just, there's so many. How about a cup of coffee? They talk about the $8 fee on top, but you're not going to stand there and wait for that transaction until you want to get out of here with the coffee.
Right.
Well, there's also proportionate risk, right? I mean, you can get your first confirmation, and do you really need to wait for 5 if it's only a $5 transaction?
Because people do that already, right? Like PayPal, it's reversible, right? But people accept PayPal transactions, just hoping it will not be reversed, right? And same thing with credit cards. It could be that it gets reversed, and usually the banks have some sort of guarantee on that, but usually PayPal has no guarantee. You're up for the money. So I mean, if you make a small purchase, there's a chance that 5 blocks later, somebody, it was a 51% attack first. Somebody's like Big Mac, like maybe, probably not, right?
Probably not.
So.
But that was actually initially a feature Bitcoin was trying to push for merchants, was the irreversibility of the transaction. I mean, as I said, from running a company that dealt in e-commerce, deals in e-commerce, I mean, you do get scammers that send you an empty box back and then go to Visa and say, I returned the product. Oh no, you sent an empty box, and 99% of the time they'll side with the customer, and the merchant is the one that takes it into shins for those type of transactions.
So you don't need to wait for the full verification, and that's not.
But I know what you're talking about, like the 5 block or whatever you need, and you don't want to wait to 8 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, there's some. I know, like Dash, I believe it asked, so you had sort of masternodes that would effectively guarantee the thing without waiting for the full confirmation. So you got into this pseudo, not quite decentralized, but could speed things up. So yeah, I'm not.
I think that's what the concern was, because I've heard that there's the opportunity for double spending, and there's those other kinds of things that can come into play with it.
It's pretty slim though.
Yeah.
Cardano's pretty fast. The block time's 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I don't think that pertains to Cardano. That's actually
right.
If you really want 3 transactions for your cab, you can, wait a minute, I guess.
So. Well, that's now.
That's true. That's now.
That's when it's centralized. And when
Speeds
it's decentralized, it's actually supposed to get faster. As we're.
I mean, so for Cardano, the block time will not shrink. It'll stay at 20 seconds. I say block time, but it says slot time. But yeah. I mean, the reason it's at 20 seconds is because there's a point where if it's too small, you just cannot send it across the air.
Yeah.
Right. So because you need the transaction to propagate across the entire network, and at least Ouroboros Classic, this is not true in later papers, but Ouroboros Classic assumes that if you send a transaction at the start of a slot, it will reach by the end of the slot across the network.
Yeah.
Right? And so if the slot time is like 1 second, it will possibly not even reach nodes in 1 second, right? If you reach across the world, like send something to China, if your ping's like 1-2 milliseconds, like even the round trip is not that good. So empirically, they found 20 seconds was almost always safe, and so that's what they picked.
Yeah.
And if you try and lower that, then you get into problems. Ouroboros Prowse partially deals with that, in the sense that some slots may be statistically empty. So in Ouroboros Classic, there's always a slot leader. They may not show up, but every slot is assigned to somebody. in Ouroboros Prowess, there may be slots that are not assigned to anybody, and that's by design, I guess. I mean, it's a side effect of the different way they're generating the seeds for the slots. So you could consider a flaw, if you will. IOHK looks at the positive side and says, well, now there's going to be some extra buffer time for the network to all sync together and make sure everybody's at the same spot. So,
got a question for you.
Yeah.
How's going to be dealt with the size of the
Thanks for coming.
Yeah,
thanks for
because it is
Yeah,
going to
absolutely.
grow and grow and grow.
Right.
The sharding, one thing. That's it.
Yeah, I mean,
10 years from now.
yeah. So IOHK has been working on this, right? So like the non-interactive proofs of proof of work, this paper is partially on that topic. So one thing it's for is like a compatibility between two different blockchains, right? So you can somehow prove that a Bitcoin transaction did happen, and therefore you can redeem your 1 Bitcoin on the Cardano chain. Like that's like one use cases. The other use case is just trying to shrink the existing history, right? So there are ways to skip over history that you may not need, and sharding is one way of doing that. And this kind of non-interactive proofs of proof of work is like another way to go about doing that. How do you confirm that transaction actually happened without having to sync the entire chain? So it's a research problem, and they're working on it, and we'll see how much is mathematically possible, right? But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a problem. Like Ethereum already, it's pretty long. Bitcoin's pretty long. I think the Ethereum chain, the full chain, is like over 1 terabyte now.
Yeah.
So like even we're getting to the point where like, you know, you need to have a hard drive that holds over 1 terabyte if you want to run a full node. I mean, fortunately, hard drive space is not too expensive, but it just means I can't run a full node on my laptop if I wanted to, right? It's just no longer possible.
It's also time. As I mentioned when we were for our project, it was like a 7-day sync up just to get up to speed. It's like, do you really want to wait 7 days just to start doing something? So.
How long does it take for a new wallet to sync now? I haven't.
Cardano?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, when I...
It must be a few hours, yeah.
Few hours, yeah.
And I mean, obviously, longer
it's
term...
around 2 million files. 2 million WinK files.
Yeah.
And 15%.
Yeah,
just started at the beginning of this.
Oh, you did it right now?
Yeah, I just installed it before I got here.
Yeah, the reason it's exploring now is more of a function of the design than the actual size of the blockchain. So if once they optimize things, it should be a lot faster. But obviously, the chain is growing in length. Fortunately, if you will, ADA is not being that used right now. So I think right now it's like 1 transaction per like 5 seconds, 10 seconds.
Yeah, if you watch the Blockchain Explorer, it's pretty quiet, and a lot of them are just test transactions or something.
Yeah, so most blocks right now are like, I forget the size, it's like 500 bytes or something of that range. So fairly small. So we're in the early step where like, you know, the blockchain is not increasing that by that much. But obviously that will ramp up in the future as like more transactions start occurring once there's more use cases to the currency. So.
I do my wallet every 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
94, 92%.
Yeah.
I'm just 7 or 8 minutes some days. 100%.
Basic question.
And nobody stole.
What is K? As in the K again?
Yeah, so it's a framework for you to specify the grammar and semantics of the language. So the grammar is like the syntax. So you say like you must have an expression followed by an expression in term, where a term is maybe like a addition or blah blah. If you study computer science, maybe you're familiar with that. Maybe not. But you say kind of like how the language itself is structured, and then the semantics is how these grammar pieces work together, if you will, right? And the semantics works as a list of replacement rules. So you say like if you run into this term, then it will replace this with this and blah blah. And the replacement terms are, I mean, if you've studied like first order logic and these kind of stuff, the team behind K has a thing they came up with, which is a matching logic, which is like I mean, it's more complicated for sort of logic, but if you've studied this, you might kind of know the idea. And if you look at it, a lot of it kind of looks like a functional programming language in the sense that it's like a bunch of stateless replacement rules. And then if you want to have some sort of state, your file at the top of your K file, you'll have in kind of like XML structure, kind of like some sort of encoding of the state of all the different properties. And then in your replacement rules, you can refer to this kind of like a global state. So that's my understanding. I haven't written anything with it, but I mean, I've watched the presentation and whatever. So that's kind of how I see it. And then, so once you have these rules or whatever, then you give it to the K framework, and they have a program that will run. And based off your grammar and semantics, it will automatically generate the compiler, the interpreter, the debugger, all these tools for you. Does that make sense?
So for the KVM, is it like kind of like a complete rewrites of Ethereum's KVM?
Yeah.
Where it is.
Yeah. So they re-specified it all using the K framework.
So
it's all on GitHub if you want to check it out.
Does that mean all the existing decentralized apps from Ethereum could be just easily ported to Cardano?
Yeah. Yeah. So so yeah, because the way they designed the KVM is just based off of the Ethereum yellow paper. So they tried to follow the formal specification as much as possible. Obviously, in any specification, there's sometimes like a gray areas. And I'm not sure if there are any gray areas that actually impact the results. Hopefully there's nothing notable. I know for Ethereum, there's like two main implementations, right? There's like parity, and what was the other one? Yeah, but there's like two different groups that have implementations of the EVM, and they know each other, and they're trying to avoid this like difference between the two systems, so they like cooperate with each other to make sure everything matches. And I'm not sure how much runtime verification made sure everything matches with like their systems, but theoretically it should all be compatible. Does that make sense?
So what's the advantage of IOHK creating features of the language for writing decentralized apps on Cardano?
Yes, good question. It's in my video. No, but so yeah, I mean the idea is that K is the kind of base framework, right? That everything will want to run on. Yella is on top of K. This is like the next layer up, and the reason you want to use Yella is because they have kind of a unified gas model. So like Solidity has its own gas model, right? They have their own way of saying, oh, this transaction costs this, whatever. But Ethereum was kind of like the first attempt at this. And so when the runtime verification created the K EVM bindings or whatever, they're like, this is probably not the best way to go about it. Now that we have all the domain knowledge or whatever, let's try and make something better. And so that's kind of what Yella is supposed to be. It's not similar to the KVM. It's more similar to LVM, if you know what that is. But so Yella provides you, okay, this operation will cost this amount of gas and blah, blah, and here's the rationale. And then on top of that is any other system you want to build, right? One of which is Plutus Core, which will be provided for you. And the reason that you like Plutus Core is that Plutus Core is essentially the smallest subset possible that you get all the features that you need. So they're trying to make like as simple of a functional programming language as possible. And then based off of that, if you want to use this, you can write your own language on top of Plutus Core. So IOHK will write one, which is like just Plutus. So just Plutus runs on top of Plutus Core or Plutus Map, whatever they call it. And then the idea is that if you want to swap out Plutus, it will be independent from Plutus Core. You can just like swap the version on top. And if you want to swap the underlying Plutus Core, that can like swap independently also. So it's supposed to, like Plutus Core is supposed to be like the base for the functional high assurance platform, right? So if you want to write like a high assurance smart contract or whatever, you should probably be using Plutus Core as your base, because the amount of stuff that you can do is like a more limited, more well-defined. But if you want to do something that's like larger in scope, then probably you'll want to bind to Yella. And then if for some reason you want to define your own gas model, then you would go to K directly. If that makes sense.
All right, we got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I didn't know if we had any other questions to go over. Or...
I got a question.
Yeah.
What other POS platforms, working platforms, are out there?
I don't think there's any.
Which other ones? What?
That are working.
Yeah.
Oh, that work?
Yeah.
There's, I'm not sure if there's any of
because
them.
the concept of POS.
Yeah. So I mean,
hasn't been
Ethereum
tested yet.
is the arguably the biggest one that wants to make the move to POS. They have a Casper is the protocol, I believe, that's the leading.
EOS, EOS.
Yeah,
and I believe EOS. Yeah, but I mean, I just saw some negative press about EOS and some, I don't know, it was hacking or some of their nodes weren't secure. I don't remember the details, but they're running into some problems.
None that we're aware of.
So I mean, there's none of them that have a provably secure proof of stake model.
Right. Cardano is the only one that has that.
Yeah. So there are coins out there that have proof of stake.
Yeah.
But it's like some guy had this idea and he's like, well, what if we do this? And then they run production and it works. Mm-hmm. But maybe if you look at it, then maybe there's like some flaw and you could abuse the system and whatever. So there's no proof of stake coin that is provably secure, right? Proof of work, we know it's provably secure because there's a bunch of papers on it. Yeah. Ouroboros is the only publicly available proof of stake system that is in production, as far as I know. There's other papers like Algorand is kind of different. It's not purely proof of stake. There's a certain proof of authority component to it, and I think there's another
Snow
one.
White. Is that another
Yeah,
one?
it's Snow White.
There's a couple of papers, and I think I heard some talk of an ICO around. They wanted to build a coin around it, but I mean, right now Cardano is it in terms of provably secure and actually, running, if you will. So I mean, that was the whole reason I actually got into Cardano myself. So
right. And so there's also like a DPoS, the distributed proof of stake, which if you think it's a success, it's pretty subjective. I mean, Neo uses it. Right. It's 100% centralized. List uses it. One organization owns more than 50% of all nodes. Steam uses it. It's kind of like a mess in there. Even Dan, who created Steam, like no longer wants to touch it. So I'm not sure if there's any distributed proof of stake coin so far that people can point to and say this has been a success, right? Steam is like the closest one, but it like depending on who you ask, like people have like a strong opinions about whether or not it's actually working. So maybe EOS will also run on DPoS. Maybe EOS will be like the first successful DPoS. Maybe it'll also fall into the same problems the other ones have. We'll see what happens. But DPoS is not pure proof of stake, right? In the sense that there's a fixed set of block creators, and you vote on those. Whereas for Cardano, there's a theoretically infinite number of block reducers. There's just whoever wants to pay the cost of running the computer. So that's kind of where we're at. So we're at a frontier of research on this topic. So,
but like I said earlier,
yeah,
about 7 years.
Well, the key is mass adoption. Yeah, that's the key. Yeah. And it's too complicated for regular people to do it, right?
Yeah. That's part
to
of the
go
press
from
one.
this coin to this coin to this coin, this wallet to that wallet. It's not easy, right? And it's going to be unified or probably, I don't know,
a shakeout.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like the internet companies in the late 90s. You had this whole spread, and now we have Facebook, Google, Apple, and a few others, Tencent and whatnot.
I feel like there will be a shrink of consensus protocols, because right now, like, there's so many coins that have their own ad hoc consensus protocols, right? But it's clear that we're moving toward interoperability, right? Everybody's trying to get atomic swaps working and all this kind of stuff. But to prove that you can do an atomic swap means that you need to write a paper on the topic and prove that, okay, if we do an atomic swap using this and this and this, you can prove that there is no like a way to abuse it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not trivial to figure out if it's abusable, right? The proof of work paper for the non-interactive proof of work, it's a fairly long paper, and there's a bunch of other people that have done research on the subject. They've been working on the equivalent for proof of stake, which is the Ouroboros proof of stake, but they've been working on that for a while. And eventually you'll see these kind of like papers like, okay, if you have this consensus protocol, then if you follow these steps, we can prove that you get these properties. But then if you have some ad hoc protocol like Joe wrote in his basement, like, will anybody really trust atomic swaps? Probably not, right? And so probably people will like move away from these other protocols that do not have the interoperability layer. So that's kind of what I think will happen, but I know you never know, right?
There's no more foundries.
Yeah.
It'll change.
But I do think it'll shake out and centralize into.
Remember last year?
What's that?
Crazy ICOs last year?
Yeah.
It was nuts. And look, this year it's different. And the regulations are coming.
Yeah, that's another aspect. I mean, that's.
What's going to happen.
Anyways, with that, we're at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for coming to the first meetup. If you have not grabbed a t-shirt, you know, don't be shy.
Thanks for organizing it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was good to meet you all.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So we haven't decided the frequency of these meetups. We can do monthly, we can do bi-monthly. It depends what people are interested in. I think the reason it took us so long to do the first one is because we want to wait until there's like more to talk about, if you will. Like if we did this back in like September, October, right after the mainnet launch, it'd be like, all right, guys, did you read the research paper? And it's like now we're like more at a stage where there's like a lot more to talk about. And you know, as things keep working on, maybe like a monthly basis gives us enough fodder to like have discussions. But I'm not sure what people are interested in.
You got some questions.
Win t-shirt? Yeah, sorry if you're not here, you missed out.
Win Lambo and win t-shirt.
My
There we go.
suggestion would be quarterly. You have the summer coming up now. It's pretty hard to get people together in the summer.
Right.
So you're end of August, September.
You could do in late summer, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would.
That would be.
Plus, I think would be closer to staking, and I mean,
Yeah,
a few other developments.
Product could be available.
Yeah, the yellow testnet is coming out some point in July, I think, is the target.
Is that
month. Yeah. So probably something around that range would be nice.
Yeah. But well, I guess we never got to the utility aspect, but at least we got some ideas. But I mean, it is an interesting dilemma of.
Well, it's too early to answer all the questions. But I just want to get involved in the discussion and see what's being talked about and thought about. That's I want to try and get a sense of the direction.
Yeah. Well, you're watching the ATM for 2 hours. That's like Peter Lynch model.
I do my stuff by walking around. That's the way I. Is it really there? Do they have a plant? Do they have inventory?
Well, but I mean, that's the thing. Whether it's, I was looking at Litecoin and a lot of it's like, where are the merchants?
Yeah.
Ultimately, and that's nobody has solved that chicken and the egg dilemma.
Right.
And if you can solve that, I think then it's a very big payoff for whoever can successfully do it.
Right.
So that will be to be determined.
But I would want to see that they put that requirement closer to the top of the list.
Right.
To address it. They've got to have a stable platform.
Well, I mean, that's what the Cardano Foundation is working on, right? They're working on like the legal side of. So I mean, they have lawyers to think about this.
Yeah. But it's not just. I mean, you have to actually have people going out to work with the merchants, provide an API or some type of software that interfaces with whether it's Magento or whatever your e-commerce platform is. And again, how do you address the fiat conversion? Because ultimately,
well, there was that one fellow posted his Amazon. You could buy an Amazon gift card.
Yeah, that's arguably the closest I've seen to like, you can convert it to a use case.
He did it in 5 days, and he had things up and running and it worked. And I don't know how many transactions he has generated on it.
Anyways, I'm gonna end the stream, guys. If anybody's listening, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean that was a good